Peace, peace, peace. All right, all right. Everybody tapping in. So listen, my first time really going live on YouTube. So bear with me. Peace and light, peace and love, everybody. Peace to the planet. Peace to the planet. Appreciate y'all for tapping in real quick. So glad y'all can tap in real quick. So I'm not gonna be on here long, family. Just gonna hop on here and hold on. Give me 1 second. Bear with me, fam. Yes, ma'am. Yes, I am, baby. What is going on with your car? I want you ever hear your car. I'm confused. No, you can go ahead. I tell you we'll come. I don't know. I go tomorrow early or something like that before everybody get out of school. Just please put some gas in there. Then. For the love of white Jesus, put some gas in there. Right, you about to go to $10 too, man. Besides that, man, listen. Nobody gonna get your son his phone and your daughter this mattress. It's $185. All right, my bad, fam. Had to storm the council real quick, lay down some laws, you know. Lady talking crazy. Hey. Women, you know how y'all get. That female lioness. King Leo got, hey, calm everything down. Relax. The Cubs are good, you're good. But ladies are felines and they get a little, you know, it's in their nature. Peace, family. What's going on, y'all? I want to tap in real quick for just a little bit of time, not for too long. This subject matter is really been in my spirit. And the subject matter that I can't let go. Oh yeah, I'm standing on land. Gotta move in silence. I'm standing on land. So this narrative that telling us, or teaching us about the so-called Negroes, about colored folks. You all have seen evidence that they have purposely changed the records on the record for the record. We all know now, we have evidence that they have literally, and not just Mr. Plecker, with the Racial Integrity Act. Not just that, at the dawn of the 1779 first US Census. Check this shit out. So the US Census in 1779 was determining how many of what of who were in the colonies. We need a quick head count. Because by 1779, the colonies had been signed up for a nice little minute in 1779. They had already fought the Revolutionary War. Crispus Attucks had already got executed. Prince Hall was passed away by 1779, I believe, because he came in that same time frame as Crispus Attucks in the 1770s. Okay. So 1779, the first U.S. Census goes out. And only about 4 categories, maybe 3 categories were counted. Of course, it was white man, free white person, and didn't really apply to the indigenous folks who were already here on the land. They had no rights. See, the land had got usurped. I'm only talking about North America. I'm only talking about North America. I'm not talking about Africa. I'm not talking about no African slave trade. I'm not talking about Haiti. I'm not talking about none of that shit. I'm talking about North America, the 48 colonies, 48 states, US history. And I'm going to tell you just straight up US history. So we don't get confused with the Atlantic slave trade. We're not talking about the Atlantic slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade, you have to go back and start with people like John Hawkins and write down the name John Hawkins. Make sure y'all share this live because I'm about to go to fuck in. Share this live. Hit that like button, heart this shit, lock it in. Y'all want to see M.O.I go hard? I'm about to go in. On TV a couple times here with a lot of great people. Red Pill, Taj Street Bay, the infamous Dr. Eileen Bay. And it has been such a great awakening. So shouts out to Crumb TV. Because Crumb knew I used to go in like that back in the day. Because I came from people like Dr. John Henry Clark, Ivan Van Sertima, Chancellor Williams. I came on from people, I didn't really get down with Bobby Hemmett much because I was on Phil Valentine, Dr. Deborah Blair. See, Dr. Deborah Blair is the master teacher of this shit, not Bobby Hemmett. Deborah Blair break all this shit down. Dr. Phil Valentine does an amazing. John Henry Clark said something in his lecture. He said, "Want to understand history, you have to study European history." So I never started with Africa. A lot of people started with Africa. Like Dr. John Henry Clark had said, I went to Europe, y'all. And then going to Europe, I learned a lot. I once lived in tribes also. And they came out of tribes and formed nations. I learned about the Byzantine Empire. I learned about what feudalism was. I learned what a duke, a squire, an earl, a count. I learned all those noble titles and where those noble titles came from and how they got their nobility. And they really don't be playing when they be claiming land. Like they really don't be playing no games. Like they out to conquer realms. That's just their pedigree. Survival of the fittest. That's how they always been. The real barbarians. I mean, Vandals and Visigoths and Ostrogoths. So I studied European history first. And by studying European history, it kind of gave me an insight on a lot of things. So when I heard brothers and sisters talking about the transatlantic slave trade, oh yeah, I'm about to go in. Share this. When I hear brothers and sisters talk about the transatlantic slave trade, and they're implying that the Africans out of Africa are you who got brought over here. Like right now, those are your people who got brought over here. You never thought to ask yourself which America. Again, I'm not saying that the transatlantic slave trade out of Africa did not happen. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I want you to challenge and ask the people who are telling you this information, which America were they brought to and when. I always tell y'all this. I always ask which America they came to and what year. Okay. And if it's 16 anything, get cotton out of your mind. If they say Africans came to America in 16 anything, doesn't matter what 16 anything, 17 anything. Get the images of Negroes and cotton fields out of your mind because that doesn't happen to 1830. These are not the same people. Did Africans come to North America at a time period? Absolutely were brought to North America. How many more were brought to South America than North America? Do the numbers. Quantified in 2024. Just Google which America has the highest African population, and you'd ask yourself, well, why they got so many, we got so less if we're them? I thought we were up here. No, it's a lot of Africans who got brought to Brazil, South America, to mine for gold. A lot of them were amalgamated with the indigenous people who were already there also, who by that time were akin to the Toltec and the Incans, and dare I say the Mayans. They, they were there prior to Africans being brought to South America, is what I'm saying. Being brought to South America. I'm not saying that Africans never came to South America ever in history. It's not what I'm saying. On the transatlantic slave trade, the first time Africans out of Africa were brought into Brazil was on the mass droves by the Spaniards. You write this shit down. Spain is always going to be involved because when you hear about things like slavery in America and the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, you don't ever think about France. You don't even think about Spain. You don't the Dutchlands. Your mind don't even think about other people who were involved. This was a world race. The European world had now set out on a global manifest destiny. Manifest destiny happens again after the 1849 gold rush. This was the settlement of the western frontier when they made California a union state. This was right after the Missouri Compromise, when they couldn't decide if Missouri was going to be a slave state or a free state. This is the three-fifth compromise. For every 5 slaves, only count 3. Not that you're 3/5 of a person. They never said that. You never were a person in the first place. You were chattel. You had been reduced to the lowest ranking member of a society called black, and you accepted it. So the deception been going on for so long, and I just watched this special on YouTube, and I made sure I made comments in the comment. It was a great rendition of the Devil's Punch Bowl, which is a real location. Matches. Watch this shit. The Union soldiers barricaded these enslaved Africans in 3 encampments and starved them to death. And they died from disease and hunger, starvation. And they subject the men, the Union soldiers, to horrible working conditions. These working conditions were far worse than slave plantations, they say. Think about that. They said the people in the Devil's Punch Bowl who were perishing were begging to go back to the plantation because of the conditions were so horrible. Devil's Punch Bowl, Mississippi. It's a documentary I just watched. And our hearts and prayers goes out to everybody who's affected by it. Because these are generations that were cut off due to this malpractice of humanity. The Europeans show you receipts that they do it. They did it. Listen, this is what we did. This is called American history. You get Black history. They get American history. That means they get to celebrate their slaughters. They get to celebrate murder, conquest, lying, stealing, thievery, all the devilishness. They get to patriotize that shit. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands for one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's the freaking pledge that many of us took in middle school and primary school and kindergarten. We took a pledge, an oath every day. That was the freaking pledge. You pledge your allegiance to this nation. You didn't know. It was no different than praying to that blonde head, sometimes brunette head, white dude on your grandma's wall. And your grandma telling you that was Jesus. These are the babies in the 80s, because I'm 42. Anybody over the age of 36 know what I'm talking about. That grandma who got the big wooden spoon and the wooden fork on the wall, them grandma houses. They had a white Jesus and a thick white Bible with a blonde hair guy on the front. You didn't know. You were taught by your uncles and aunties that you're black and proud because it came up through the 60s. They had surpassed the Negro talk. They got called niggas a lot. Excuse my language. They got called that term a lot. But now they were black and proud. And then those children of the 60s became our parents. By the time we became of age, we were calling ourselves African Americans. By the time we was 13, 15, 16-year-old, we were black or African American. We didn't question it back then. We know better now. Back then, we didn't question it, right? Malcolm X has a speech that said, who taught you you were this? Who taught you you were nothing? Like, who taught you this? Question who taught you this. Where did this come from? Question everything, believe nothing. The proof, the burden of proof is on you to figure it out. It's a riddle, it's a rhyme. Just figure it out. So now you have black people in America, black and they proud African Americans. We accepted the spell. We also accepted the fact that we were a part of this society. And we had a long, dreary history in this country of violence being done to people like us due to the pigment of our skin. Just because they could do it, they did it. They implemented policies, legislation, acts, actual law was put in place. The Fugitive Slave Act was a law. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, go look it up. This was an act. Now, I'm gonna tell you what the fuck wasn't a law. Emancipation Proclamation was not a law. So let's please stop with the Emancipation Proclamation did so much for so-called Negroes in 1860. Anything. The first thing that Lincoln put in play was something called the Compensation Emancipation Act. Look that shit up. 1863, 62. And Lincoln gave away $3,000 or $300, I'm sorry, to each freed slave that was money. That was his first move. And he figured if they made enough noise up in the Union states, there were 22 Union states, 11 Confederacy completely separated from the Union. That means the Confederacy had its own president. It had its own currency. Okay? Understand that. Then next thing you have to understand, the president sets what's called the executive branch. You still have the judicial and legislative branch. Judicial branch never passed it as a law, this Emancipation Proclamation. Legislation was never written for it. You don't get anything until about the 13th freaking amendment, coming along way later. When Negroes wanted to receive the right to vote, 15th, 14th Amendment. These were amendments, never written into practice in the first place. They had to go add something to it. And it was conditional. We'll talk about the conditional of those amendments in a second. But the Emancipation Proclamation was not an act. It was not a law. It was just Abraham Lincoln making in the Union, make an announcement by, hey, listen, we freeing our Negroes. No. Tell all, listen, Suge Knight, you don't want the Confederate soldiers all in your videos. Come on over to death row. Come on over to the Union. That's all Lincoln did. A proclamation. Oh, people, we got to understand these words. They spells. Proclamation is a public announcement made by any government official. That's local government, federal government. Any official in the capacity of government can make this announcement. It'll be known as a proclamation. It wasn't an edict or a papal bull. That carries way more weight. Papal bulls and edicts. Like the papal bull or the edict known as the Indica Terra Divina, issued by Pope Innocent VI, blessing the House of Castile and the House of Aragon, which is Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. The House of Castile and the House of Aragon. That sets up what became known as the transatlantic slave trade. Okay? Okay? All right? We're talking about 1489, 1491, 1492. What happens? A Spad Italian by the name of Christopher Colombo gets granted one ship as a scout ship to go to the West Indies. Christopher Colombo is supposed to have been going. And the West Indies, like today, they call the Caribbean islands sometimes the West Indies. You better go? Okay. Hold on. Thought you just called. All right. You gotta say. Known as the West Indies. So Christopher Columbus was actually trying to circumnavigate to get to India over in Asia, like Bali, that India. But those Bali looking people and the African looking people had been coming over to the Caribbeans for years already. Mansa Musa and the crew been coming over here. You know, Carnival Cruise Line, just a big Carnival Cruise Liner full of Africans coming over to the Americas, the islands, I mean, and mixing them in with the Carib, and some of them mixing in with the Taino, ancient tribes, Arawak. They was out there. Okay, Arawak Nation got them Tainos. Those early Africans who came to the islands with came over with Ponce de Leon. Yeah, Hispaniola was jumping with little brown skin, long hair people, amalgamating with the African people. That was to this day. That's what the islands are. Haiti, St. Croix, St. Lucius, Jamaica, all those islands out there with those people of color on those islands are descendants of both Africans and indigenous people who are already here. An offshoot of those Caribs are a group known as the Maroon. And the Maroon were in places with the Miamians. Look up the Miamian tribe, you don't believe me. And outside the Miamians, further north, they were known as the Cimarron, which are called the Seminole. And amalgamated in with the Seminole, you had the Yamansi, or some say Yamasee. You also had a group called Yamakra. Now, the Yamakra under Chief Tamachichi was the first one to make contact with James Oglethorpe, who became the bondsman the certificate holder, the trustee for the colony named after King George, Georgia. And they took Chief Tamachichi and a couple of his people over to Europe. Look it up. Look this shit up. Write this down and go look up. There's going to be a little melanated young boy with colonial clothes on standing there talking to the white folks. And it's going to be a little group of Indians with their cloths on standing behind a little melanated black boy. And he's interpreting what they're saying. He's an interpreter. Go look it up. Look up Chief Tamachichi James Oglethorpe, if you don't believe me. Those were the Yamansi and Yamacraw. Now, up north on the Gullah Sea Islands of the Yamacraw, because that's where they made contact with James Oglethorpe, was in Savannah. Those are all islands out there, island chains outside of Savannah. Jackal Islands out there, so on and so forth. Just north of them, they had the rice growers, who y'all commonly refer to as Geechee Gullah. They're not, they're older people in the North America. Don't get me wrong about the Geechee Gullah, but they're not as old as the Oshitush or Washita. They're not that old on the grounds of North America. It's neither here or there. So anytime they tell you about the transatlantic slave trade and slaves are coming out of Africa into the America, you ask them which America and ask them what year. Again, I'm repeating myself. If they say 16 anything, they brought Africans to North America up to, ask them what work were the Africans doing when they got here for the next 215 years until cotton came. What were they doing? What type of contract were they under? These were contractual workers, better known as African slaves. He was contractual workers. I give you one contractual worker. He was from Angola. He worked his way through his contract and was monumented, and then he bought himself some slaves. This was an African brother here in North America, and he ended up accruing quite a bit of slaves. And this brother ended up retaining custody of one of the contract workers for life. Look up a man by the name of John Castor. John Castor. John Castor. And his name is Anthony. He was a African under contract, Angolan, who monumented himself and became a plantation owner himself. And there are several other so-called black plantation owners that they don't tell you about who accrued a lot of money. Now, all of these black plantation owners and slave owners, not all, maybe one or two of them were just granted. They were granted the plantation and the workers under some type of condition of the plantation owner. Look at it as a type of severance, because in some cases the plantation owner was the father of a lot of those house Negroes. Okay, and because the plantation owner was dipping in the tea so much, a lot of these little half-colored, good-haired Negroes would work in the house. They would work though. They still in servitude. They would work, but sometimes the planter wife would get so upset with one of these half-breed Negroes because in some cases, white women at that time period were barren. Ask me how I know that. Because shortly after the 1800s, right to the early 1900s, 1920s, the birth control rate of white families was very low and very scary in America. In fact, they had to introduce something called positive eugenics. Positive eugenics, trying to encourage white families to grow. Next thing you get, a boatload full of Europeans from Europe, immigrants or migrants. They were immigrants, undocumented people getting documented in Ellis Island to offset the population of these booming, all of a sudden, good-haired Negroes, free people of color, they call them. They've never been slaves. Then you had the freed men who were slaves at one point or enslaved at one point and was monumented or freed of their own status or own merit. Sorry. So that's something to think. Then everybody was not a slave in America. No, sir, no, ma'am. It was a population of people who were in servitude. They were in what's called debtor's jail. Okay. Because see, right after the Civil War, once the Union completely destroyed Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama, they completely destroyed. They completely destroyed the ports because they was exporting cotton like cocaine. Like the Confederacy, and Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy, by the way. Jefferson Davis, they had the South like a cotton cartel down there, man. You hear me? Cotton was booming. 1863 looked like 1973 New York with the cocaine. Cotton was everywhere, and the South controlled that shit. Look up what's called the Black Belt. The Black Belt is this rich black deposit of soil that runs through the South that's perfect for growing cotton. What? Tobacco shadowed at number 2 for export. But in the Americas period at that time, cotton, sugar, and rum were the top 3 imports into Europe besides tea out of India. You have to study European history to get that though. Studying African history, you probably wouldn't come across nothing I'm talking about right now. Studying African history, African American history, whatever that is. Because it starts with slavery and you get to Obama. And that's the African American history. You don't get a prehistory. You don't get a pre-colonial history. You don't get a lesson about who you were before John Hawkins got the first contract for Queen Isabella to export Negroes out of Africa into the Americas. John Hawkins, write his name down. John Hawkins was the first paid contract. These were contracts. This is work given. Queen Isabella commissions under contract John Hawkins to set sail, to take them bodies over there and work, because Queen Isabella just claimed dominion over North America, South America, Central America, and the adjoining islands. Dem Versi and Indica Terra Covina, those documents are papal bulls issued by the Pope. This was right after right after the fall of Granada. Tariq Bey talks about it all the time. The fall of Granada, Tripoli, and consequently, Spanish explorers, or they're not explorers, they're agents. These were all agents. Oh boy, it was all agents under the crown. The uh, the religious groups who came into places like Puerto Rico and South America and Mexico and set up these monasteries to begin to teach children, the indigenous children, religious practices under Catholicism, converting the people. They came in, they came in with the same motto as Constantine. In hoc vince, in this sign we should conquer. And it came in the sign of a sword that you keep calling a cross. And this sword sat up on a sphere or a ball. Look up these old Catholic churches, but look at them by denomination. Look up the Presbyterian, the Puritans, the Quakers, the Calvinists. Look up these religious European groups that came over here on a pilgrimage. They're not pilgrims; they were on a pilgrimage, which was a religious Hajj to over here what was called the Promised Land at that point. The Puritans just had got pissed off at the publication of the King James Bible, 1611. Prior to that, what do you get? You get Desiderius Erasmus publishing the first Bible. Watch how all this stuff goes together, because there's no document or no text to be propagated to these indigenous people. They had to have a text put together. And the text they put together was the Old Testament, which is known as the Pentateuch, or by some is known as the Torah, or by some scholars is known as the Safa Harasa literature, the Safa, a Sophie, Book of Wisdom. And the Book of Wisdom was guarded and protected by a group of individuals, scribes, who in some cultures known as Mukmin or Mukminati, men of the book. So this book got put together under Desiderius Erasmus. Me and Crum talked about him before. Erasmus, Erramus, some shit like that. Desiderius Erasmus. But just look up Nova Instrumentum. It's like Testamentum, but it's Instrumentum. Nova, which is Latin for new. Look up Nova Instrumentum, and you'll get Desiderius Erasmus. And Desiderius Erasmus was in cahoots in some parts with people like William Shakespeare or Sir Francis Bacon. Desiderius Erasmus transliterated it out of Greek into Latin. 1535, he put what was called the Nova Instrumentum, the New Testament. He put it with the Torah and put it into one book and compiled one book for the first time in 1535. Then John Wycliffe comes behind him and does it. Tinsdale, um, Gutenberg. Gutenberg was a little bit earlier in the 1400s with the Gutenberg printing press. But the point is, Europe, they needed a text to go propagate to these indigenous people on these new lands. They had to come with something. And when they couldn't quite get it with the religious sectors, they brought in the mercenaries called the conquistadors. Now we're going to come up into parts of Central America. Well, where the Spanish Inquisition, the Inquisition was only in Spain. A lot of Moors tell you that the Inquisition was just in Spain, or the Inquisition was throughout the theater, the Eastern theater, what they call Al Maghrib, the farthest west, yeah, over there. Europe thought it was flat, so they didn't go too far. Remember, they told you that. So who gave them no notion that something else was over there? They thought they had conquered all they could see. They couldn't quite conquer the Mongoloids, the Mongols, or the Asian tribes. They couldn't quite conquer them little jokers in Asia. Marco Polo, Italian, introduces noodles to Asia. Now, the Asians had the printing press way before the Europe had a printing press. I mean, the Far East, they call it, was a little bit more educated, fundamentally sound, and grounded in the understanding of nature. By God, parts of Asia, you go over there and they see Negroid statues with wide nose and curly hair, known as Sambo Judea. Oh, behold, the first melanated ninja, master ninja. So coming back to North America, and again, when I teach, I like to teach world history, what's happening all over the world. My job is not to keep you confounded to just talking about slavery. I'm giving you the global look of slavery. Look at the snake, y'all. Y'all see her? Look at her. That's a rat snake. She is gorgeous. That's a black rat snake. You don't want to bother those. You want to let those be. They keep rodents and stuff out of your house. Yeah, it's a black rat snake right there with that round head. She got that round head. All right. I'm about your business, sister. I'm about your business. Gliding through the garden in the cool of the day, huh? Gliding through the garden in the cool of the day. It's long. So let's thank you, sister. Put the notes down there. Thank you. Thank you, sister. It's long. Um, so now going back to North America, there is an Atlantic slave trade. As I told you a second ago, Queen Isabella to the newfound lands or the new colonies for Spain. Now Britain hadn't gotten in the race yet. Uh, 90, 15, we're talking about the 1500s when Spain first comes over here and takes over parts of Florida. You know, Spain owned Florida. Spain also owned Louisiana, Texas, California, and Mexico, and much of South America outside of the Portuguese and the Dutch. They came in no holds bars, slaughtering thousands, millions of people, and converting the rest of them. This was a mandate, transatlantic slave trade. Why are we bringing Africans from Africa over here to work? We got a million indigenous people over here to work. Why would we need so many Africans over here to work? What kind of deal do we got with Africa? What's happening out of Africa that the Queen can go over there and hand pick Negroes to go work? What happened in Africa? It's the question you have to ask yourself that allowed so many of our brothers and sisters to be exported, stand in lines on piers to be stamped like cargo, loaded on the ships and exported over to a foreign land to work. Africa was full of resources, minerals, gold, fulsite, vibranium, not vibranium, I don't know, ivory. But the Americas had a different pot of gold that they wanted. The Americas had put out stories of a city of gold, a lost city of gold, they called it. And this is what the Inquisition was over here for. Cortez and his crew, while they went toe to toe with Chief Montezuma. Look up Chief Montezuma. They duped him on Expo for the City of Gold. So Spain was running all that. So a lot of this stuff was the Spanish colonies you're reading about or hearing about in history. And the Spanish colonies, unfortunately, yes, they used African labor along with indigenous labor to excavate thousands upon millions of miles of mining for gold. That's why the population in Brazil or what they call Afro Latina is so thick. Even in Mexico, okay, don't get it twisted about who been over here for the longest, who been here. You look at look at them indigenous so-called Mexicans with them afros. You look at their cousins over there in Fiji, okay, and the Micronesian islands and Hawaii with them afro. Okay, you show me an African in Africa, they got an afro look like one of them afros over there, brothers in Fiji, the brothers and sisters over there in Hawaii, not the one with the pressed hair. Okay, they don't amalgamate it with the Mongoloids too. They got they got Pacific Ocean is right there off the coast of Asia. Come on, it's a matter of time. So now, the transatlantic slave trade happens the way they say it happened, to some degree. But the slave trade that we have to focus on, the slave trade that may get us a little bit of movement in the courtrooms about when it comes to what they call reparations, is us telling the real story of the second Atlantic slave trade. And the second Atlantic slave trade happened the way they showed you on the movie 12 Years a Slave. I think that I was one of the first ones to show y'all how to show y'all how in the movie Roots, which Roots was put out in the 70s, this was the first time Black America had visually saw a story of what they've been told about slavery. They never seen it the way it was being told. So Roots had to perpetuate the idea of what slavery looked like. That's why you look up slavery on Google right now. They're going to give you Black people in clothes out in the field working. Now, the Africans they brought off the ship, okay, had on little togas to cover their hind parts and their pee-pee parts. These people in this field you see out here, fully clothed, like what? Working. Just something to think about. The time periods. African came over in the 1600s to do what? Pick cotton in 16 what? No, that's 1830. Cotton becomes very popular in the South under succession of the Confederacy. Keep that in. I'm gonna go back to that in a minute also, because this all plays in the part of the 1808 when they implemented outlawing international slave trade in 1808. 1850s, you get the Fugitive Slave Act. 1863, Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Compensation Act. If you're just tuning in, you have to understand the three forms of government: executive, judicial. Those two right there. If it doesn't hit the judicial, it's not going to hit legislative. Legislative, judicial, executive. Those are the three branches of government. You can't get so excited because the president said something. It was never law. The Emancipation Proclamation was never law. Never law. Never a law. Congress had nothing to do with it. The judge, the courts, nothing to do with it. Just something that was said. And y'all too old not to be looking into shit. Excuse my language. Y'all too old not to be looking into stuff. By this time, any word that you see that you don't quite know what it is, go look it up, fam. Look up the etymology. Look up the etymon, the origin of the word. Just do yourself that favor. Because if any point anybody looked up the word Emancipation Proclamation, emancipation is transfers of property. Then you would have saw transfer of property. I wonder who was the property. Ooh, you were the property. So-called Negroes at that time, they were the property. So what could Lincoln do, being that Lincoln was not the president of the South, he was the president of the Union, which were only 22 states. The Confederate states belonged to a whole other president, Jefferson Davis. All 11 of those colonies were his to control. They had their own currency in the South called the greenback, their own economy. Booming. Lincoln wanted to stir some trouble because the Union of the northern states at this time wanted to follow the orders of Europe. These are still European colonies. I don't care what y'all say. Oh, 1776, 4th of July. There was just Europeans fighting Europeans. That's all that was. Okay? They were the same people fighting the same people. Civil War, same people fighting same people. They're crazy. Lincoln issues the Emancipation Compensation Act 1863. Between 1863 and 65, before the actual initial war, Lincoln just popping his collar. Lincoln just doing his thing at this point. Lincoln also sets up blockades. This is so they cannot export the cotton out of the ports. This was a vicious act. Lincoln messing with the South pockets now. Lincoln is invoking the war. In lieu of that, he issues the Emancipation Proclamation, because Lincoln is no longer sitting in the seat as president. He's now sitting in the seat of commander in chief. Did you know that? And the commander in chief commands the army and the navy and the marines under acts of Congress. They had more votes, they had more seats, they had more people in the union. They decide, hey, pop it off. We'll murder them. Pop it off. And as an extra incentive, because a lot of the Union troops were dying, believe it or not. Yes, Indian tribes were also enlisted to fight. You don't believe me? Look up Quitman Drew. Quitman Drew. Quitman Drew. Confederate soldier of the Cherokees. Cherokees had their own Confederate branch. Confederate flags, you call it a Confederate flag, but it's just the Galactic Cross. But they had the Galactic Cross battle flag up there and everything. That's what they represented. Okay, they would get commissioned to go capture other fugitive so-called Negro slaves and bring them back to the plantations. Quitman Drew. Quitman Drew is said to be the husband of Elizabeth Drew, who is a full Washita tunic native and also the mother of Timothy Drew. This is what I came across my research. Somebody check me on it. 1863-65. Jefferson Davis is captured. Jefferson Davis being the president of the South begins to fall under Union control. Grant was not fucking around. Excuse my language. Okay. Also, what I found interesting in the 1860s, you have people like Hiram Revels, the first black senator of Mississippi. You have people like Isaac T. Montgomery founding Mound Bayou, the first so-called Negro founded city. Founder. Not talking about Greenwood, Orchard, and Pine. Not talking about Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is before Tulsa, Oklahoma. Prior to Tulsa, there were several Tulsas, Oklahoma. There was several black instances where our people were doing just fine on their own before integration happens, which was a terrible idea for us. That was the topple of any hope of black people rising economically or doing for self was the introduction of integration. Terrible for black people. Terrible. No other people come over here and tries to integrate. Nobody integrate. The Asians are not fighting to integrate instead of white counters. They're building their stuff, supporting their own, which has been the plight of the so-called Negroes in North America is the struggle politically and economically, which I ask you again to understand the term black, according to science, means death. Calling yourself black, if you believe in the law of vibration, words weave spells. As I talk to you right now, you're hearing the vibrations with you or it's not resonating with you. It's a certain frequency, a certain tone that's speaking to you right now, right? So word spell book says the word black means death, or what they call in law civil mortus, civilly dead. And all you've heard about your black life was civil matters, civil rights, civil cases, settlement cases. Lining, public housing. You can literally see the decline of Negroes happening right after integration. The crack era, the Reagan era, the Clinton era, all these eras of time that was totally against our people. But we find ourselves believing in history that Lincoln actually did something. Lincoln was a lawyer. Lincoln Lawyer is a great show, by the way. Plug. But Lincoln himself was a lawyer. Lincoln knew that he could not just free people in a whole other country. The Confederacy was his own country. That's just like Biden screaming at the top of his lungs, everybody in Cuba is free. It don't work that way. The Confederacy is a whole other nation. Then Lincoln goes into his war power seat as commander in chief and issue what's called martial law. And under martial law, which became the new law of the land as they extinguished the Southern troops, they would do shit like tell all the Africans, the so-called enslaved people of the South, hey, if you come fight for us, you'll be free. But you got to fight first. Okay. And the only way that they could run away and go to the Union and sign up, because the Fugitive Slave Act was 1850. That was a law. Lincoln was now breaking the law by invoking them to run away, knowing if they were caught or captured, they would be returned back and beaten. Lincoln invoked the ancestors to run away. And some of them did run away. A lot of them made it over to the Union. But their status, ask yourself, what became of their status at that point? What became their status at this point, family? There's, hold on. Can you guys hear me now? Can you guys hear me? Do I have sound? Check, check, 1, 2. Can you guys hear me now? Okay, I'm good. Appreciate you. All right. Microphone check. Cool. So, what became of the status of these runaway people from the Confederate states over to the Union, becoming Union soldiers? What became of their status? I tell you what their status became. Their status became that of property. Lincoln reclassified them as contrabands of war. Now, write down the word contrabands of war, Abraham Lincoln. And it's going to tell you that Lincoln changed their status to contrabands of war. And you go look up what contraband is. And then you go look up what emancipation means. Emancipation at its origin means the transfers of property. Contraband is called Union property. Now those poor Negroes who ran away as Southern Confederate plantation property, now they became property of the U.S. Union. And because those people's statuses changed to that vector, they set up things such as the Freedmen's Bureau. And the Freedmen's Bureau got a lot of change from the government for the reallocation of those displaced Negroes, they call them in the South, due to the Civil War and stuff. So we're going to offer these displaced Negroes to come on back and give them 40 acres to get started. 40 acres? That's right. 40 acres. In a meal? No, they don't get 40 acres in a meal. But what happened, old Union troops left some of their donkeys down there and just gave them to the freedmen. Here, take. They didn't have a whole lot of them. Just had a few of them that they had because they had to farm and live during the war down there as well and grow some food too. They didn't have a store to go to with some commissary. Fuck. They had to set up camps for weeks and months at a time and hang out in the woods of Georgia for 19 weeks. They had to eat something. Think about this stuff logically, okay? So the Union soldiers occupy the entire southern region now. We haven't quite got to the Mexican War yet. The Mexican-American War and Alamo's coming up. You stay tuned for that too, okay? They're going out west, going to some shooting. Those Texas Rangers come out there and get their tail whooped by them Buffalo Soldiers, okay? Who are part of the Muskegon Nation. Okay, we'll talk about them in a second. So Lincoln reclassifies these runaway Confederate slave issues what's called the Emancipation Proclamation, which is the very same thing. He also issued the Emancipation Compensation Act in 1863 to compensate plantation owners for emolumating their slaves only in Washington, D.C., though, nowhere else. He thought this would incentivize Southern whites to do the same thing and cripple the South's economy because the South didn't want to come alongside the idea of the industrial age, textile mills. That's why in the North, you would be hard pressed not to find a history of manufacturers and textile mills and car companies, the Ford Company, GMC in Detroit, New York, big tall buildings, puff of smoke, textile mills, t-shirts. That's when America was great, booming economy. Racism at its highest, race pride at its highest. You find it strange at the same time that the Klan had trampled down on our people in the late 1800s to the early 1900s, we still found room to be prideful and clean. Huh? 1865 to 1920, and people still living from that time period, by the way. Born in 65, you was alive in 1920. You old, but you still alive, though. So it wasn't that big of a time frame. 1920, we got the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem Nights. Y'all seen the movie. They give you their version called The Great Gatsby and Dick Tracy, but because they were the real gangsters in the 1920s. These Italians and these ghouls, these Irish hitmen, Irish mafia, Italian mafia. This is their starting roots in the late 1800s, early 1900s. The industrial age, city life. The city really starts to pop off a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Prohibition. Prohibition comes out of the Third Great Awakening, religious act saying you should be drinking on Sundays. No way. Okay, a lot was going on in that time frame, but the 1920s we were still a great people. Don't think that we were all in chains and shackles. If you see any movie and they got our people in shackles and chains, understand in your black mind right now, close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. I'm not gonna keep going to you. Close your eyes. From now on, when you see a person like you in shackles and chains, just understand they are not the slaves. They were the ones who kept running away because they knew better. Those were not the slaves. That's psychoneurosis. That's that reverse psychology to make you think that those were runaway slaves. No, they were runaway slaves. Sorry, that those were just slaves with chains on. No, they kept running away. They kept trying to get back home. Remember now, the whole time I'm talking to y'all, I'm not talking anything about Africa. I know because I've been talking about slaves the whole time. Your black mind been in Africa. I'm only talking about the African-looking people who were already over here since the 1600s. You want to see some darker skin, some darker skin so-called Native Americans, the darker skin. Look at the Pamunkey. Look up the Pamunkey Indians. Look up the Wampanoag. Okay, and then look up Chief Metacom, King Philip. They call him. This is the 1500s. This is early. We fighting these people. Been fighting them. Been fighting with them. Been fighting them off for thousands of years. And they've been feeding y'all bad information. They don't give you the whole truth. How do we know that the South was under martial law? Because that's how a lot of stuff got passed and a lot of stuff happened under these general orders. For example, General Order number 15 was the 40 acres of supposed mule that was passed under martial law that became a law. After Lincoln was assassinated, President Andrew Johnson vetoed and reversed that thing, that 40 acres in the mule, leaving a lot of Negroes high and dry. Okay. And we about to creep out of the not quite late 1800s. In a minute, I'm gonna show you a quick move to the 1920s, 1930s. It's gonna freak you out. But let's stay in the late 1800s for a second. 40 acres in the mule, returnees of droves, not a lot. Some of them stayed in Oklahoma, some went out to Mexico. Of the darker skinned, the so-called Indians we're talking about. Yeah, a lot of them stayed. That was the first Great Migration, which was the Trail of Tears. The second Great Migration was in the 1920s, and the third was in the 1960s. Of so-called Negroes migrating out of the South to the North, out West, California, to Watts, South Central. You know what I'm saying? Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, stuff like that. Late 1800s, Negroes are now senators. Hiram rebels. Look up Hiram rebels. Lord, we just came out of slavery. Now we in legislation. Now we're senators. How did that happen? How did that happen, family? And Hiram rebels was never a slave. Handsome brother was never a slave. Ask yourself now, why don't we talk about these people who were never slaves in the same time that you're showing us this slave story? That's my whole thing. Why are we talking about these people? Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have to show me movies. The same way you showed me movies, the same way you showed me 12 Years a Slave, the same way you showed me Roots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Part 16, the same way you showed me Color Purple, the same way you showed me Django, Harriet, and any other slave narrative movie. Show me in reverse side of history what was also going on with my people, how we were thriving and doing well for ourselves. Show me that positive story. They won't dare show you that story. They'll talk about it a little bit. You start digging, you're gonna find a whole lot of people besides Mr. Hiram Revels in the 1860s. Then later, 1900s, 1920s, that was that was the gangster era for a lot of Europeans. Because remember, they just brought over Ellis Island those migrants, the same way they're doing the so-called Mexican migrants to America now in 24. They did the same thing with Ellis Island. They flooded America with those undocumented, unskilled speaking people. If it wasn't for things like the YMCA, which was founded for European white youth, if it wasn't for things like welfare program for white women, because a lot of white women were not allowed to work. See, in that time frame, 1920s to 1970s, I'm gonna stop at 1968, 69, because black women started to get into that white women's movement, and sisters, y'all start tripping, because anybody never said y'all didn't have no rights. We know y'all run it, but this was the pivot for our black women that had to turn their backs on their men and scream they want their dependency too. This was the start of it. The women's suffrage movement. Look it up. Women's suffrage movement. And black women really didn't get on board into the 60s because it was a huge political movement in the 60s. Women's wanted rights now. The blacks are getting rights and civil rights passed. The women's felt like, hey, 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 now. And it's just the wife beaters, the Italian men outside with the tank tops on, slapping the wife around. They're Catholic. They bound to be married forever. That's how Catholic marriages work. It's hard to get out of a Catholic marriage. Very hard. Since the time of King Henry, since his time, it's been hard to get out of a Catholic marriage. Anyway, why don't they show that side of history, family? Why don't they show us doing well in the 1920s? Why don't they show us doing well in the 1860s, 1850s, 1750? Why don't they show us doing well? Why do they keep perpetuating these negative images of you just so downtrodden and you're at work all the time? You lazy people, you. Every picture you have of us, we're working. They're just so used to us working that when we don't work, we look lazy. And you have such a stigma or a curse of laziness, some of you. Even when you stay in hotels, you find yourself cleaning the hotel room before you leave. It's a hotel. You already paid for the clean. I'm not saying destroy it, but you don't have to clean up before the cleanup. You're taking their job away from them now. They're getting done ahead of schedule because of you. But it's just the the phobia we have as a people of words. Appreciate it, sister. Islam. Islam. So the sisters, they alongside these white women who ain't never care about y'all in the first place. Early 50s and 40s, you were the mammies too. Their white babies were feeding off your black milk. Okay? They disrespected y'all to the utmost. You seen the movie The Help? Watch the movie The Help. You get a better idea. That was the 50s, 60s, how they felt about us. That was, hey, we gonna need y'all sisters in a minute. That's when Jet Magazine got involved. Ebony Magazine got involved. Look it up early in the game. And they rallied these sisters to join the movement because they knew a white man is only scared of two things: not having money and a black woman. I'm telling you, black women scared the mess out of white men. White men with power. They know black women got power. They know the power of black women. That's why most white executives and CEOs will hire typically a black assistant or secretary under him. That's Sister Sharp though. Nothing to do with her sexuality. Sister Sharp went to Yale, high honors, magna cum laude, sister on her stuff. But they know that she's going to work harder for him than anybody in the company. Just the nature. And if our brothers get into divine alignment, the sisters do the same thing for us. We got to align ourselves divinely, though, brothers. And our sisters, the sisters of the queendom, the sisters of the queendom, the queendom. Okay, think about that. So anyway, now the 1860s, 1900s, we just got promised 40 acres, 66, 68, 1860. I'm talking about under the Freedmen's Bureau. And this bureau was toppled and pillaged, and the books, the money got lost. They had a couple 100,000 back then to redistribute land to so-called Negroes in the South, and a lot of people returned back under those conditions and terms, starting to work and toil, but realizing they had no seed and had no tool. Uh-oh. Who got the seed and tool? Who got the seed and tool, you think? Now, we're going to talk about the scallywags and carpetbaggers who came down right after the war, too, that took advantage of our people as well, setting up shops and stores, issuing credits. Credits, you have debits, okay? That's how that works, credits and debits. Setting up merchantism. These were barons, they call them. Lombards, capitalists. This is when everybody took advantage of our people in the South at this point in time. But the seed and tool did not belong to the Negroes, just got ran off. You don't look up the Indian Act, the Indian Removal Act. Sorry, the Indian Removal Act. This is during Andrew Jackson's time. Andrew Jackson precedes Lincoln, in case you didn't know. Andrew Johnson comes after Lincoln. Johnson and Jackson not the same people. Okay. Andrew Johnson revoked the 40 acres and a mule situation under the General Order number 15. Now, General Order number 3 was being read in 66 in Galveston, Texas. Look at what's being read, not laws per se, that was voted on by Congress, but under military might and power, under what do they call it? Uh, under the UMCJ, the damn, U, what is it called, family? The UC, the UMGC, the Uniform Military Code. That's it. UMCJ. That's it. Sorry. The Uniform Military Code of Justice. That's what happens. That's what happens. So Lincoln issued General Order number 3, which most of us y'all, people, family, celebrate Juneteenth. Juneteenth came under the reading of General Order Number 3. Why do I keep saying General Order Number 3? To show you in the 1860s, America now reformulating this Union and Confederate, putting the band-aid back on the country, is under martial law. The entire land under martial law. That's how they're able to read off Article Number 3 in Galveston, Texas, and declare all so-called Negroes are hereby emancipated under the executive of the United States of America. And henceforth, the condition between slave and master is no longer that, but employer and employee. We advise all freedmen to stay indoors and continue to work for wages. Your idleness will not be tolerated. You're not allowed to gather at military posts either. It's paraphrasing, but that's General Order Number 3. Hey, Juneteenth. And the real truth behind Juneteenth from 1866, from the time that was read. Remember, 1850, what happened? It doesn't matter about General Order Number 3. General Order Number 3 is not finna trump the act passed by legislation. See, the general orders are not legislative acts. Those are military acts under codes of conduct, like abandonment. You could be executed during wartime, stuff like that. Leaving your post and all those kind of stuff come into play then. I'm prior military. UCMJ, that's what it's called. UCMJ. Military Uniform Code of Military Justice. UC, that's what it is. So now Lincoln invokes the War Power Act as the executor, commander in chief, and General Order Number 3 is released. And General Order Number 3 says, such and such in Galveston, Texas. General Order Number 15 says 40 acres will be given. 40 acres issued to some of those who came back. The Freedmen's Bureau helped to relocate displaced Negroes. Look them up. These are not African people who were in Georgia and got pushed over to Oklahoma. These are not Africans. These people who were already here, who got reclassified and relabeled as Negro. They tell you they did that. Indian Removal Act. They got to go. Who got to go? All these Indians. Listen to this shit. They gave you the Indian Removal Act, what gave you the Trail of Tears. This sets up later the Civil War that happened in 65. All of a sudden, after 65, they're inviting Negro, not Indians, to come back to Georgia and Alabama, Mississippi. They're not inviting Indians to come back. They said the displaced Negroes. Wait a minute. When we left, we was Indian. Now we Negroes? Yes, because we relabeled y'all. Lincoln just reclassified you as contrabands of war. So we don't even know what to call you, really, for real, because we don't know what y'all nationality is no more. You've been stripped of your nationality. We don't know who y'all belong to. Cherokee, Blackfoot, who y'all belong to. We don't know. The first census in 1779, you know what else happened in 1779 besides the first U.S. Census? It was the first classification under what was called the Naturalization Act for Europeans. The Naturalization Act of 1779. Sorry. Naturalization Act of 1779. Write that down. This is when Europeans reclassified themselves as naturalized to the land. They couldn't be nationalized because they're not nationals they're not from this land. 1779. That's when the census began to calculate how many of who was here. Before then, 1600s, colonial time, 1500s, you either belonged to the crown or you didn't. There was no such thing as black niggas and crackers, but it wasn't like that yet. This was coming from the nobility class. Yes, black people were part of nobility class too. They were squires and sirs and earls and dukes as well. Okay, they had those nobility titles too. They had the family crest also. They owned manors and territories in Europe also. So the idea of you being classified as a Negro, black, or colored really came into play under socialization. Socialization and displacement, robbing you of a curiosity for your history because they kept you looking off the front porch to Africa. The East Coast is the front porch. They kept your black self on the front porch, looking off the front porch to Africa. You never looked off the stoops. You never looked off the back porch. You just looked off the front porch the whole time, kept pointing toward Africa. And while your back was turned to America, they robbed you of everything. And for some people, they displaced the curiosity to even find out anything is true about us already being here. And these are Christians. And the Christians believe in the Bible. And in the Old Testament, it says that once upon a time, not long ago, there was this place and it was void and darkness upon the face of the deep. And some type of energy moved upon the face of the water. And this energy spoke and said, "Let there be light," and there was. But this wasn't the sun. The sun don't get made to the 14th verse. We're in Genesis 3. Oh, Lord, what is this light being made? Watch this. Stay with me now. This light that got made in Genesis chapter 1, before the sun got made, is the infinite light that you find in John 1. Look up John 1 in the Bible. John talks about a light that's inside of man that the darkness comprehends not. The darkness that shineth in the light, but the darkness comprehends the light not. First thing Genesis chapter 1 would happen, he separates the light from the darkness because the darkness can't comprehend the light. What is the light? What is the light? Christians believe that light was Jesus in the beginning. Well, if that was Jesus, they say the Holy Spirit was present too in Genesis. Where can we find the Holy Spirit of God? If Jesus was the light and God was performing the task of creating the light, which was Jesus, that's two. We have to find the third, which was the Holy Spirit or the anointed spirit or God, the abundant light. If you go to Genesis chapter, go to chapter 1, the best way I can explain it is uh, Prometheus. Prometheus part 1 happens. Prometheus outer space happens, to put it that way. Because Genesis chapter 1 is heaven being created. Chapter 2 is the earth being created with man on it. Okay. Genesis chapter 1:27, you're going to learn about Adam Kadmon, Kadman. Adam Kadmon is the primordial being. He's also known as Adam Allah. He's known as the first primordial man. He's known as God Allah himself. This is the third. This is the triune. This is the Holy Spirit. Because the light got created. The light was, they say, Christ, the bright morning star. Because that first light he created in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3 was not the sun. The sun got created way in verse 16 with the moon. So what was that light doing? Because the stars came before the suns got made. What was that light? What was the embodiment of that light? Imagine that light going inside of a prism, inside of a cube, and that cube is spinning at 360 degrees. That cube you see spinning in your mind with that light in the middle is known as Metatron or Metatron's cube. That infinite light spinning at that propensity creates what's called a Merkaba or Merkaba, Kaba, 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 Ka meaning spirit, Ka meaning breath, Ba meaning some call it chi, some call it spirit, some call it breath, some call it ruach. I just wanted to break that down for y'all, family. I enjoyed y'all, man. Let me post up here real quick. Thank y'all, sis. Hey, Queen. Thank Queen of Forces Healing Ministry. Thank you for taking notes for me. And that was well needed. Um, thank y'all so much, family, man. I appreciate y'all. Peace and light. Be sure to share this. Be sure to share this. It's about time. I'm gonna be honest with y'all. Let me turn it. Hold on. Let me get my camera right first. I'm gonna be honest with y'all. This is around the time I'm about to start receiving all my downloads again. Okay. So I just need y'all to take notes for me. Um, take as many notes as you can. I mean, written notes, type notes, whatever the case is, because I'm gonna put out a lot of information in the next few days, and I want y'all to tap in with me. Okay, I want y'all to do your own research. I want you guys to look up stuff, dig some more. Okay, I appreciate y'all, man. Peace and light, peace and love. Share this tag. Shouts to Crime TV. Peace and light to Dr. Eileen Bay. Peace, family.